Jatin, so we will start with the slides whenever you say go ahead, because I just spoke to Kirti sir also. And once the regulations part of it comes, Kirti sir will take it in depth. I'll run through the basic slides. And once his regulation parts is done, then I will move to the case study.
Sure, thank you, ma'am. We have got some audience. So,
Okay.
hi everyone, good afternoon. So we will start the webinar sharp at 3:03. Just wait for 2 minutes. We will start the webinar.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Sorry, may I know your good name, please?
My name is Jatin. I'm from SIC IIT Kanpur, and I have my colleagues Manaswita and Sonalika who have joined. So, a very warm welcome to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think IIT Kanpur, I'm not sure whether it is IIT Kanpur or IIT Kharagpur. There was a webinar with CDSCO and IMED.
It's IIT Kanpur, sir.
It is IIT Kanpur. That lady, the lady from IIT Kanpur.
Aditi.
Was handling. Yeah, Aditi, correct.
Yeah. So I will request Manaswita to start the webinar. And
okay.
Okay.
So Manaswita will start the webinar. Will give a brief introduction, and then you guys take it.
Second. See, I'm using my phone for audio, and I'm just using my PC for presentation.
Sure.
My laptop. So I'm trying to join using my laptop as well.
Sure.
So I need to adjust this, but when I keep presenting, you will not see me looking at the phone for the video, but probably I will just join the video in the presentation so people can see the face, and then probably I'll put off the video here.
Sure. Manaswita, over to you.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. This is Manaswita Pandey from SIC IIT Kanpur. I warmly welcome you all, our speakers and the attendees of the webinar. The title of the webinar will be The Medical Devices Pathway in India. Let me start with a brief introduction about the background, medical regulations and the medical devices hold in India. So India is now recognized as Asia's fourth largest medical device market and one of the top 20s in the world. And it is expected to grow at $11 billion, but is heavily dependent on imports. Like 80% of the medical devices are being imported. This high reliance on import present to us an appealing opportunity to be Atmanirbhar in area of medical devices. But a country cannot be self-reliant if it has to depend on some other geography for the import of the devices. But during the COVID, our indigenously developed vaccine gave us an opportunity and created a nice opportunity for the people to come up with their own solutions and medical devices. Initially, the medical devices area was not very regular. The regulations were not there, but now after the several initiatives by our government of India, there are several regulations present. So to be Atmanirbhar in the truest sense and to tap the global medical device market, we are here to run through the journey of a medical device, like the regulations and the path that a medical device has to follow to get come to the market in India. For this session, I would like to warmly welcome our speakers. Mrs. Meena Dalal. She is a founder and CEO of Trialguna. Holds a good experience in CRO industries. She has good experience running oncology, dermatology, and new dairy discovery clinical trials, and has been leading the CRA for quite some time. Our second speaker is MS Kirti Sir, who is a senior consultant and is currently working as a consultant in IT and medical and healthcare sector. Sound professional, lead auditor, and holds a good amount of experience and skills in project and product development. I welcome you all. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Manaswita. Very kind of you. So Kirti sir and I are very happy to be here. Sir, would you want to address that, or shall we begin with the presentations?
Ma'am, we can move forward with the presentations.
All right, perfect. Do you want me to share my screen, or somebody from your end?
Sure, ma'am, you can share the screen.
Okay. Just a moment. Please let me know once you're able to see my screen.
Ma'am, can you please share again?
Just a minute. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So for today's presentation, we are going to focus on a couple of things. First of all, we would like to thank IIT Kanpur and both of you, Manaswita and Jatin, for this platform and for this discussion. And thank you all the participants, because we would really want to have this discussion. And as Manaswita rightly addressed, it's a growing field wherein a lot of new startups as well as international bodies are now taking interest, and India is likely to become the most popular hub for not only clinical trial conductance of medical devices, but also for usage and the technological support. As you can very clearly see how the development is going in Punjab and the nearby regions, and as well as the rest of the country, and IIT Kanpur and many such incubators are supporting startups for this device work. For today's discussion, we would focus on very brief insight as well as a clear picture of what exactly is the preclinicals and clinicals that we talk about. How does a clinical investigation differ from evaluation? As you must have heard these multiple, or rather synonym usage of these words, but these aren't. What are the medical device trials? Why it is needed? Kirti sir will take us through the guidelines and regulations that we require for medical devices and why. What is the registrations required? When is it an NOC? When is it a permit? When is it a approval? All these differentiations. Why do you need a guide, or why do you need a CRO to guide you through? And of course, we'll go through a small brief case study just to give you an idea of what does the involvement help with. Most of you must be very clear about this slide, that what is the difference between preclinical and clinical research. Many a times we also define it as in vivo and in vitro. When you say in vitro, it covers more than preclinicals, which also means in cell lines, in laboratories, and also in the draft mode of it, or the complete medical device design is being considered. And clinical trials wherein we are looking at the usage of that product, be it a wearable, be it a consumable, be it a syringe, be it a infuser, be it any kind of an MRI machine. We are basically looking at the usage of it in the human beings who are going to be using it in the large run, and at the end users. So when we say clinical investigations and evaluations, what we mean to say is we are initially looking at that whether this product is meeting the objectives it is made with or not. For example, if the product has been initially systematically designed for the purpose of being a pre-filled syringe or for the purpose of an inhaler which disposes X ml of powder or X ml of what you can say, a fume in X amount of minutes by application of a certain pressure, then we would want to assess whether the safety and performance is exactly that. If we say 30 ml of the, the product will be released in 10 seconds by the usage of the product, then that is what is expected. And if it does not do that, then we call it as a clinical investigation failure, and the product again goes back to the design part wherein we are looking at it and we are seeing what else can be done. Here, there is one more pointer which has been added, and that is effectiveness. So safety, performance, and effectiveness, it is measured via in vitro methods, which could be mechanical methods, via chemical assessments, which could be with the usage of its constituent extract preparation and quantification. It could also be via microbiology sampling, wherein we assess the shelf life, the safety parameters, the inertness of the device and such. And it could be also by the exposure of transport testing. And then onwards, it comes on the on the physical presence of it. That if we say that in each time that you fill it, it only brings you back 10 ml, neither 10.8 nor 9.5. So that measurement also we have to look at. So there is physical, chemical, microbiological, transport assessment, and animal assessments, whether the product actually works the way it does or does it create any kind of a toxicity. This could be very much true for electromagnetic devices, as well as the devices which, for example, your class 4 devices, wherein there is more than physical interaction of a device. Those cases, it becomes very, very important. Whereas clinical evaluation, we put it down as the more which we talk about the relevant research or relevant theoretical assessments which we are looking at before the product is developed. These are done in theory, these are done in literature, these are also done by the peer reviews to assess and to assume a hypothesis, which then is used for clinical investigations. So please be very, very clear with this. I am checking the message box to see if there's any questions at any point. How many here are participants who, have their own products or are working on their products? Any participants?
How do we understand that as an answer to this question? Anyway, I think going by number of 41 participants, it would be tough to understand who would raise their hands because it is not an online, it is an online session. Meena,
I think on the Q&A box, one of the participants had answered this.
Ayush.
Rishi Ranjan.
Ayush Singh and
Yeah.
Kajal. Ayush and Kajal, they are having their own products.
In the attendees also, we can see 4 raised hands.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's assume one thing, Meena ma'am.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
there are a lot of people like startups
It would
who
be
are
difficult
attending.
to understand how many of them raise their hand, how many of them do, and what is that. I think with the available time, we will assume that suppose you already have a product, what is it? Suppose you are developing a product, what is it? And suppose you only have a concept, what is it? I think with that, it would make sense to go ahead with our way of presentation to people so that everybody can understand.
Okay, we could do that. We could do that. So here, majorly, sir, this is divided into the 3 stages, which is talking about the clinical trial stages of any medical device. Let's take an example of a wound healing device, which is going to be the case study later on as well. Thereby, I take this example. So when we say proof of concept, when we say, we have designed a device which helps in removing the excessive amount of pus around the wound and keeps it dry and clean so that it can heal faster. So the first stage will be to have such kind of a cases and explore this, whether this really works in the intended way or not. Is it only creating some kind of a empty space, or when you're trying to remove the pus, then is it causing any kind of a further infection, or are we scraping off the skin which was rather healing? These are some of the superficial points which I can point out towards that would have been taken care of when we are exploring. And when we say measure the outcome and evaluate the performance, so here it has to be going specific. I cannot say any kind of a wound or any size of a wound. Then I have to define, am I looking at a burn wound, or am I looking at a wound which has been caused by an accident, or am I looking at any wound which is along, which has been as a result of a surgical process. And while defining that, how much, what is the size, the length, the width, and the depth that my device can handle. If I do not assume that, and if I do not count it, then my device will not be effective. Then it will be just as good as the doctor knows how to use it. Whereas the entire point of using a medical device and using it to the precision is to be able to address a certain kind of wound. So those pointers you will assess when you're doing proof of concepts. Safety and efficacy, as I said, safety we would be looking at preliminary as well when we are designing the device, and we will look at it when we are looking at the efficacy. When you say efficacy, the regulations, the data that they look at is more on the lines of, if my product has been found or has been claimed to be effective for any kind of a burn, surgical, or accidental wound for less than 10 millimeter in depth and 10 centimeter of radius, then what and how much of duration does it take to heal the wound? What are the cautions that have to be taken? What is the level of education and quality of life along with it that matters into the game? And also they would want to see that whether we have taken a larger sample size or we are just doing it on 1 or 2 subjects, because the larger the sample size, more is the data, and higher the data you produce, more is the evidence that you can support it with, suggesting whether your products is found is in efficacious and has a safety guard around it or not. Please remember, any kind of a clinical trial that you conduct, or be it a proof of concept, be it a larger one, there's always a requirement of having it registered, because the regulations have to know that if there were any need, you have reached out to them, and also that whatever you do, you are bearing in mind the ethics of the clinical trial purpose. Post-marketing clinical follow-ups are usually done to look at the larger population and to see the effectiveness of it. We will discuss about that part further when we go to a slide down. For any medical device clinical trial, there are specific tools and regulations given by the ICH-GCP, US FDA, MHRA, TGA, and CDSCO in India. Why these are seemingly more complicated or conflicted rather than the drug trials is, number one, because the regulations in India specifically are not yet very clear. And it's a funny story, like other day, Kirti sir was showing us one of the CDSCO letters, and the language was completely out of bound. We have no clue what they were trying to say. And it was intended only for a very specific population, but it was released to a larger mass, making it even the more confusing for the other audiences to understand what they are trying to say. So for that purpose alone, what we have done is we have made our checklists. We have Kirti sir, and we have made our templates which are specific to classes of devices A, B, C, and D, that helps in clearly understanding that what is the path and route to be taken for a given device in the therapeutic category that we look at. The patient population also, when, for example, let's assume we are looking at a children population and we want to see if a pre-filled syringe of chemotherapy for melanoma can be used. When we say population is pediatric, please remember there is certain regulations which clearly suggest that we have to look at not only the safety from the toxicity point of view, because there's a drug involved, but also we have to look at the safety from the point of packaging view, whether the syringe, when kept on the table next to the patient, can if the patient is curious about it, could be of any kind of a harm, or is there child safety measures in place? Also, when the product is being used, is there some way to make the process more relaxing and pain-free for the subject? These are some of the concerns when it comes in pediatric population. You must have heard in the vaccine terms also, nowadays there is pain-free and pain injections. There is also usage of auto injectors to reduce the pain and to remove the fear from the usage of it. So these are very important stuffs. And also when you look at the performance and risk factors involve malfunction, which is the commonest, because that is where your focus has been from the beginning of your design to the conduct of trial to the marketing and everything. It's a big main thing that you look at, and you constantly worry about whether there could be a malfunction. The smaller thing, however, for example, we mentioned packaging. So leakage could be there. There could be small quantity mismatch. There could also be shelf life issues. There could also be as simple as understanding how to use it, which is where most of the times we assume that the trained medical staff and the investigators would know, but the training material which has to be given is playing a crucial role and becomes one of the major risk factors when they don't know how to operate on it and the product is labeled failure. These are some of the important documents which the team has listed out from the point of view of looking at what all should be there with you when you are trying to go to CDSCO and you're covering your device. One important factor here is look at a comparator if you can, global comparator. And Kirti sir would highlight a bit more on that. The reason I say that is when you look at a global comparator, your list, which is a very general list placed here, becomes more and more specific, and you will have relevant evidences and references on the patient record forms, on the regulatory status of the device, and you will be able to classify it better on the class that it deserves to be, rather than blindly looking at as per the regulations, as it varies from country to country. These are some of the few key pointers presented on from the regulations. These talk about how exactly it has to be informed, the technical language that has to be given, and what are the guidelines that you should read as your Bible along with your work on your product. Yes, this slide is very suggestive of it. The regulations, there is key regulations which has been highlighted here along with the links. So I'll request Jatin to please share all these with you guys. And also, as I said, Kirti sir would discuss these further when he takes up the topic on the regulations part of it. The clinical trials are submitted at 3 levels. Initially, it is for the CDSC or SUGAM, wherein you would submit it for the purpose of a test license and for the NOC availability, so that they don't have any objection to you conducting a clinical trial. And along with that, you go to the ethics committee, wherein you ensure that you are compliant with every guideline for the patient as well as for the hospital safety, and clinical trial registry in India as well as clinical trial registry in every other country which is available, based on which country you conduct the clinical trial on. So these are
Hello.
hello.
Yes, ma'am. Would you like me to continue, or is there something that you would like to still cover?
No, I think please, you can start from here. And once your discussion is done, I could rejoin from the case study. And would you like to present your screen, sir, or shall I continue presenting mine?
Not sure how Zoom works. I think you would need to give me access to share the screen. Right. Okay.
I think you have it, sir. You already have the access to
Yeah.
screen, share your screen.
That's true. But what it's showing is that
On the bottom near the chat, it will show share screen. So when you try to share that, there will be multiple options. Yeah, your screen is being started.
Yes, it's visible.
yeah, this is visible, right? So
Yes.
right. A very good afternoon or good evening to all the participants who have interestingly logged in to understand how the medical device developments, especially from the startups, being all of you either centered in incubation centers in SIIC or maybe even from other incubation center across various parts of our country. So thank you for joining in. And I would like to start with many of you would be in various stages of the product development. So let me give a brief because you may have different stages of the development. Some of you would be still working on from the concept what you would have probably done through your research studies, which you think is a product worth enough to commercialize. And then you come up with this type of concepts and ideas. You want to commercialize that. So you would have started with a very new, innovative way of a startup being incubated. The next stage is that after you do, you would have probably worked on the design and still be working on the design to see that various stages of the design keep working on and some trials with respect to the design, which one works well, perhaps maybe going on. The third stage of activity could be that, what you see on the yellow front, hurrah, so your design works. Congratulations. So, well, all of you would be excited. And then, I'm sure that you think you're now ready for the product. And with that excitement, you would probably go ahead with even converting that into a prototype. And most probably, all of you would think the prototype, the way in which you develop, would be in a very, very primitive stages of manufacturing and development. And with that prototype, you still would think that, yes, this is a baby that, started crying. So this is the right time to feed it. And whatever way that you want to feed and then put it into the market to see how the baby would still see the world and start moving around the world, at which point of time, all the way how a medical device should work and function, not just from the point of for what intended use the medical device has been developed, but also from the regulatory point of view, you will start seeing the baby getting into a lot of injuries and would start crying every now and then. That is the pain every mother would undergo, which as the doctors of the regulatory quality and as well as to ensure that the product quality meets the right manner in which the device has to intend as it is intended to perform, keeps performing consistently, reliably, and establish the safety of its users who are both the patients as well as the clinicians or the doctors, that it ensures the complete safety as per what way, the risk classification that it would fall into. So that's, I just would like to start from this particular introduction that when you get into any product and then the product commercialization, first interest as because being a startup, you would be funded by many of the organizations and all your fund managers as well as the people who are in your board would start demanding for bringing value addition into the product, and that is where both the IP and patent would matter. So from that perspective, every now and then you will keep going ahead and then start filing even the patent and get an IP for that. All inclusive enough. One thing most importantly has to keep in mind is the aspects on both your left and right where the pointers get into the product commercialization aspects. So let me start with the design control. The moment you get into the design, you first need to make sure that there is a lot of design controls established in the way in which you carry out the design. The next part is what are the applicable standards? Standards come in two parts. In the regulatory jargon, we call it vertical standard as well as horizontal standards. Vertical standards are very specific to the product, which matters to your product. And a lot of product-related standards, especially for various devices, are already established, which you need to know and understand and cover with respect to every part of the vertical standard that is applicable to your product. When it comes to the horizontal standards are those standards which are applicable for the processes to be adopted, for the organization to be adopted. One example is your risks standard, ISO 14971-2019, which is the latest version of the risk standard. I'm just giving one example. Like that, there are many horizontal standards. To get into all those details, it requires one more, almost a half a day awareness session with respect to what are all these elements. So with the given time, I just would like to brief that what matters for you as a startup when you're doing the design, when you come out with a prototype, and when you think that your product is ready, that you would like to give it to a CRO like Meena ma'am, to give it to the field trial, clinical trial, and to the intended use, either to the clinicians or to the hospitals. So before that, what matters is all of these. If any of these are not properly followed or built into its way of performance and the quality of functioning, it's still not ready to go into the field yet, or even not ready to go into any clinical investigation or clinical trial or clinical evaluation. Next is the usability. Every medical device has to conform to the way of usability. There is a usability standard for that, which is also a horizontal standard. You must have heard of IEC 62366. So you need to conform and make sure that the medical device usability is in as much of ease of use with good understanding. One example, a very small example, is what Miriam already covered with respect to the way of the use by means of training, by means of understanding through the label, and by means of understanding through whatever operation manual or user manual or maintenance manual, and whichever type of information as a document you provide along with the device. And then next, the safety standards. So what are the safety standards? For example, if it is an electrically operated device, when you just touch the device, does it shock? Does it electrically, get shorted, and then such kind of shortage would provide any electrical shock to the user? I'm just giving again an example for you to understand. So like that, there are other safety standards as well. For example, you may have come up with a laser device. So what is a laser? If the laser falls on the patient or to the user, or the amount of exposure, be it an X-ray or a laser to the user and the patient, then how much of exposure time, how much of area on which it falls on the patient's body or skin does matter. So all these are the safety considerations. There are standards. Those standards have to be looked into and understand what is applicable to your device, and then conform to those standards. You need to buy those standards, understand those standards, and then you need to make sure it conforms to those standards. I'm sure being incubators, startups in a small way, we need to, most of the time, outsource these kind of testing. There are various labs, various agencies who would do all these kind of testing for you. For example, if it is an electrical device, then mandatorily it has to go through IEC 60601 part 1 and then 60601-1 part 2. Both electrical safety, as well as EMI, EMC, that is electromagnetic safety. So moving on, next are the product standards. The product itself, for example, ECG. ISC 60601-2-25 is one example. And if it's a dialysis machine, IEC 60601-2-16 is a dialysis standard, and -25 is an ECG standard. So there are product standards which is already available and built in and published either by IEC or by ISO or by AMI. So you need to look at which international standards exist for your product, because the regulatory, especially the Indian regulatory, I'm going to focus and then little bit talk more about only the Indian regulatory, because we are all here in India, and whatever product that we bring in, except for a minuscule of the startups, every one of us are first interested to put it into the Indian market, establish the way in which we stand on the ground, and then start looking into other areas of regulation when you start exporting it. So that's what our regulatory calls for. Is the first preference, you look at whether there is already a Bureau of Indian Standards, IS standard established. If not, then look at ISO, then look at AMI, then look at IEC standards. So whichever international standards are available for the product, when IS standards do not exist or IS has not come out with any standard, then comes the other standards to be looked into. And then, of course, the last stage after you make it into a prototype is the clinical trial versus evaluation. So here are the two parts. Okay, if we had time, like
Kirti sir, is your slide frozen?
This slide, it's not frozen.
I'm on this slide which talks about placed into market. We are on the same slide, right? Because you spoke about evaluation and
No, what I'm trying to look at is that, see, there are two paths, right? See, many of you, when you develop a product, the very first thing that need to be looked into is whether this is a product for its intended use, which is already there in the market. You know, Meena ma'am was conveying with respect to, the global comparison. So if it is something, a new way of commercialization, both from part of certain features, part of certain cost that you have brought out into the market, but then you first have to look at whether the product you are doing is already in the market, a similar product, a predicate market, a predicate device. If that is the way in which we go through, then getting a regulatory license becomes much easier, as well as doing a clinical study becomes much easier for conformance and license. If not, if it is a totally new product, it is a new concept, a new design, and for the first time that you are coming out with such kind of a device, then you have to go through the clinical investigation path. So that is a very rigorous path. It will take more time, it will take a little more money, and as well as maybe even the cost. And well, we'll not get into the more detail with respect to how and what makes a difference in terms of a clinical trial as well as a clinical evaluation. But to be in brief, yes, a clinical investigation is an investigative path. So you need to go through a lot of way of its testing, population study, as well as the field study, then adverse events, risk coverage. When it is an evaluation, you need to look at what are all the similarities. From those similarities, you need to look at what way a clinical data need to be collected to come out with a performance to evaluate as a comparative way of how the device already in the market is functioning with respect to your own clinical data, and then come out with a clinical evaluation. So this is the way in which the clinical investigation and the clinical trial has to be initiated from even CRO like what Meena ma'am was just speaking about. So next comes certain key things or the avoiding risks. So what is the cost of implication and time to market? So these risks, you need to, if you don't address it, then the cost implications would be too high and time to market also will get delayed. So there is a lot of different way of coverage in terms of these risk factors, starting from the requirement stage throughout the life cycle for the product, as well as even organizational risks, including the risks what it would encounter, the product would encounter post-market. Once you also start selling it, once users will start using it, what way it will get into the field risks also need to be addressed even before you put the product into the market. So you need to envisage. So these are the key factors that need to be looked into, and then only that you would be ready in terms of making sure that you comply to the regulatory and then place the device into the market. All right. So I think the moderator should look into that, whether if there is any questions and answers, probably we'll keep it in the last, because let me cover with respect to what I need to complete it in the given time. All right, Savanita. Okay, right. So here I go through. First, you need to look at to which classification of a medical device you fall into. So here are some of the devices which are low risk devices, like scalpels, dental tool, or the patient scales, or even your Band-Aid. So they are all very low risk device. So we'll try to understand what is low risk. We'll try to understand what is medium risk or moderate risk, and then the high risks, and then come to the regulatory part. So some of the examples of a moderate risk devices are, the knee prostheses, the nebulizers, and the electric bed. There are many more, but then just to give you some comparison of idea, I'm just giving small little examples to understand. That is all. And then the high risk devices like drug eluting stents, heart valves, and then the pacemakers. Okay, so these are all high risk devices, including the stents. Now, when we talk about these three levels of risks, we will get into the regulatory part and the regulation now. So in India, what we have is the Indian Medical Device Rule, IMDR 2017. That is when they first came out with this regulation. So I think IMDR 2017 happens to be the very first version. Unlike the other regulations in FDA, which is US regulation, as well as CE, which is European regulation, we don't have the versioning. So instead of versioning, it is very crude to understand in the Indian Medical Device Rule and CDSCO manner in which they come out with every new gazette notification as a modification to the regulation. So in what revision today we are in 2022? What are all those changes that these people have done? If you ask me right now, I don't know which version we stand with, because the way they come out with a new modification, they come out with a file name GSR. And these GSR are all not clubbed into one portal or one folder where we can easily understand. It is only the date-wise, and every gazette notification is a GSR, so hardly we will know which GSRs are already published as an amendment to IMDR 2017, and where do we find it is a question mark, which you need to keep searching, waste your time. So CDSCO doesn't still have a proper way of organizing itself into these kind of usability factors for the users. They do and come a good inspection of our device usability, but when it comes to understanding their own way of publishing regulation, it is hardly usable. I'm sorry to say that, but that is the fact. So going through these things, let me quickly guide you through what are all the key things with respect to IMDR 2017. So it has about 11 chapters, 12 chapters. So the very first chapter talks about the application, commencement, and the definition. So first chapter is very, very important because in whatever type of device that you are doing, first of all, you need to make sure that if you are in a borderline of understanding a definition of a medical device, whether the product which you are doing is a medical device itself or not. So according to the definition, please understand the definition, because I'm not getting into all these detailed regulatory part of the training, but then I'm just giving guidance with respect to what matters for the regulation to be considered. So you have to understand the definition, and according to the definition, make sure that you fit in, your product fits in properly into the definition of a medical device. Otherwise, many times at the final moment, we have seen many companies, many product being rejected, saying that, hey, this is not even a medical device. So make sure that you fall into the definition first. So chapter 1 matters a lot. And chapter 2 is a classification of medical device, grouping of MD and essential principles. So a classification, as I told you, I showed you 3 levels, but then the IMDR has classified into 4 levels: class A, class B, class C, class D. Okay. So these 4 levels are what matters for the Indian regulation A, B, C, D. And chapter 3 are the authorities, the delegation of powers, notified body, then medical device testing centers. So who are the authorities? What jargon we use defining the authorities? For example, we have a central level authority in CDSCO and state level authority. So what does it matter with respect to state level? What does it matter with respect to central level? To be brief, when we talked about classification of A, B, C, D, to get a regulatory license of class A and class B, which are lower in risk, class C and D are highly moderate as well as higher risk, are handled, C and D are handled by the central licensing authorities, CLA, who are in Delhi. And all class A and B, every state. Am I not audible?
Kirti sir, you are audible to me. Manaswita, sorry, what was the issue?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Sorry for the interruption. Actually, we have to wrap it up by 3:55.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just go through these chapters.
Yes.
I think, without which the presentation of regulation itself, it beats the objective of our today's webinar. So let me quickly go through and run through, and still further, if you have any questions, I would be very, very happy. And then anytime you can ping me, I'll be able to answer any of these queries. So coming to the next chapter 4, or the manufacture of MD application, inspection, grant of license, conditions of license, and when they can suspend it, what can be cancelled, and then the test license. So very first thing is that everybody has to undergo, first thing, to obtain a test license, because the product has to get tested. And some testing, again, depends on the path of testing. Whether you want to undergo a research and development way, investigation way, or clinical evaluation way. So you need to make sure that you apply for a test license and obtain a test license before you start applying for a manufacturing license. And for manufacturing license, again, you need a lot of information, and there is a compliance of checklist and forms that are available. One need to go through, understand, and then start filling these information and provide the documentary evidence for class A and B, as well as even class C and D. My understanding is that the state level authority as well as central level authority will come for an inspection of the site and before providing you the license, which could take for a manufacturing license from 60 to 90 days. So when you apply for a test license, I think test license should be provided as early as possible, starting from a week to within 30 days. So this is the way in which the chapter 4 would give you an understanding. And come to chapter 5, import of medical devices, oversee inspection, grant of LIC. So this is something to do with more of importing, as well as the hospital, as well as the personal use of any devices. And chapter 6 matters a lot. This is a labeling requirement. We need to comply to this chapter 6 when we come out with even making our user manual or guidance document, which we supply along with the device. And chapter 7, of course, is the clinical investigation. Meena ma'am gave you a little brief about that, which I don't think I need to explain anything more unless you have a query, which we'll be happy to address it later. And chapter 8 is the permission to import of or manufacturing medical devices, which does not have predicate medical device. So here, this is something very important. If it's a new device, a new concept, then you have to go through the regulations as prescribed in chapters 8. That's a little tougher path. And chapter 9 is the duties of power of medical device officer, medical device testing officer, and the notified body. See here, a notified body would mean that somebody who would come for an inspection and approve your organization that it complies to the requirement of the regulation as well as the requirement of a quality management system. For quality management system, it is mostly the external agency who will provide you an ISO 13485 or ICMed 13485. ICMed 13485 is purely an Indian standard developed along with CDSCO and quality circles of India. One difference it makes a lot is, I'm sure that the moderators would push me into the time, but these are key things as an information which I wish to give whatever time it takes, because going through ISO 13485 is a completely global requirement and global acceptance of the quality management system for medical devices. Whereas going through ICMed is both an Indianly developed, which is yet to gain an international recognition in terms of equivalence to 13485. With ICMed 13485, can you apply for FDA? Will FDA consider it? Even though FDA right now doesn't look at 13485, whereas it looks at its own GMP, but its GMP is now getting completely aligned to 13485, and then very soon, probably by the end of this year, they will start working on even 13485 as part of the GMP. Whereas in the EU, 13485 is mandated, and as well as even TGA 13485 is mandated, and as well as something new which has come up is MDSAP. So there are 5 countries globally who are aligned to look at a quality management system based on MDSAP. So who are those 5 countries? I think if you start working and looking into that, it will take more time, but keep these in mind. You can Google and then get to understand. So moving on to chapter 9, duties and power of medical device officer. Okay, but here, unfortunately, the CDSCO has structured all their drug inspectors. A drug inspector from the pharma, for which CDSCO is established, becomes a medical device officer. Many times, they themselves do not know much about what is a medical device, how does it differentiate between a drug and a device, what does it matter, but the way they keep asking as well as they look into things is similar to the drug. Hence, AMED as well as our own fraternity of the medical device companies in India are working very hard to make sure that CDSCO recruits and builds its own medical device team and not consider people from the drug authority, drug inspectors like that. Anyway, this is still a challenge. I'm sure that you will start undergoing all these kind of pain the moment you get into the licensing. And chapter 10 is a regulation of laboratory of carrying test evaluation, which probably, unless some of you are trying to come out with your own lab, this is not something that you need to look into right now. Of course, chapter 11 is very important. What is it required for you to put your device into the market? So what are those regulations? What do you need to comply with? So all that is part of the chapter 11. And chapter 12 is miscellaneous. Rejection of application, debarment of application, exemptions. So this is something that you need to look into and consider that as a risk for the organization. And then make sure that you work and put everything under the framework. So going next briefly is, there are 8 schedules, which are annexures, part of the...
Apologies, sir, but we are already 1 minute above the requested time. So maybe we can share it with the participants.
I'm sorry, would you like to completely forego in what way that we need to at least meet the 5th schedule
No, sir.
This webinar? Then I'm totally sorry that
No, I agree with you 101%. I just meanwhile wanted to check with Manaswita and Jatin that
we are not doing justice. If you please ask me, we are not doing justice.
No, sir, we can continue. It's not that we have to wrap up. We can continue, sir, for another 10-15 minutes. Fine.
I don't want to deliver a half-cooked
yeah, sir, we understand.
we respect that, sir.
Yep, sir. So we can continue.
Yeah, I think you have considered these as a risk factor yourself before organizing such webinar, because you need to cushion some of these factors, please. Okay, so the very first thing is a classification of medical devices. As I told you, classification of medical device and IVD are all A, B, C, D in Indian medical device regulation. Whereas for IVDs in international regulations, there is a different way of classification. And then the second one is the fee. Of course, the fee structure you can see, and then look into what is required to get the test license, as well as what is required to get the manufacturing license, which has been relaxed from whatever presentation of the MDR that they're talking about. The third one is registration and functions of the notified bodies, which you can understand it. Fourth one is a document required for grant of manufacturing and import license. Yeah, this is very important to understand, especially it consists of even what is required. Please make a note: plant master file and the device master file. So these two are very distinct, which need to be complied for IMDR, because a lot of delta are there in over and above ISO 13485. Many of you maybe are aware of 13485, but the distinct factor to meet the IMDR, one need to work on the factors in creating a plant master file as well as a device master file. So this is something that need to be looked into from the 4th schedule. The 5th one is a quality management system. Most of it is already aligned to 13485. There is not any much or too many differences between 13485 and the 5th schedule. So the 6th one is the post-approval. You need to understand that any regulation license will be valid only for 3 years. So for this 3 years, once you start putting the device into the market, what are those kind of changes that affects and impacts? And mind you, keep this key factor, any major change. What is that major change? What is the minor change? Sorry, we don't have time to get into that discussion. But any major change would call in for one more level of inspection or sometimes a new application for license. Whether it's a minor change, it's not a problem. You can come out with a newer versions of minor change and still go ahead selling your device into the market. The 7th schedule is a requirement to conduct clinical investigation. Yeah, I think this is very important, Meena ma'am. Without even understanding the 7th schedule itself and trying to meet the 7th schedule, going into the clinical studies and clinical trial, you understand what I wanted to convey.
I absolutely do. Yeah.
Right. And then the 8th is an exemption. You can look at, there is a list of exemptions, whether you fall into that exemption or not is to be considered, because if you fall into the exemption, you need not worry. You can just go ahead and start pushing your device into the market. All right, I think I have given a very brief, a very high level tip of the iceberg of, well, when I say tip of the iceberg, you can understand how more in depth are there to work on regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I know you have cut down a lot of it and you wanted to share more, but yes, over to you, Manaswita.
I'm sorry, sir, but actually we had a bit of time constraint. I'm really sorry for that. And we like most of the questions have been answered by Meena ma'am. But still, if there is any question, ma'am, that you want sir to address.
Frankly, a lot of these, for example, when they are talking about the designed firmware to be tested, when they are talking about a software that works on mobile phones, and specifically, sir, I think there's one question which I would request you to address. Many of these innovators believe that only class C and D is where the notification is needed, or rather the NOC and clinical testing, whereas class A and B could be excused for and just gone ahead with the ethics committee. Would you like to address that, please?
No, I think IMDR is very clear that even though in the very first presentation, both Dr. Somani and Dr. Ravikant Sharma, they both said as early as 2019 that class A, doesn't require so much. But today, understanding the IMDR as well as the requirement, even for class A, certain way of clinical requirement and studies, getting a test license is mandated.
Yes. And also for softwares, I have mentioned that IMDR guidelines they could take a look at, but of course we could connect further, and Jatin, your ID has been put there too. So we'll be happy to address your concerns further via an email. And Dr. Madhurima, you have also asked the question that how do you approach companies for development, testing, and marketing? So like I said, it is not something that sir and I can very briefly answer over the call. Let's get into a bigger discussion, and there we could help you out with this.
I think I have some information to be given with respect to, not sure who has asked anything about software, but when it comes to software, there are two types of things to be considered. Okay. Very first level, distinguish whether you have a software as a medical device, which is called SAMD, or whether you have a software which is part of your medical device, which means that your software works along with the medical device. And then the kind of software could be various other ways. You may have a GUI which displays and then shows everything in a web or a web portal or any other display. As well, you only have a software which is part of an embedded system which sits in a firmware, and then that whatever way of these categories of the software, still there is a regulation and a lot of regulatory and as well as standards requirements are there to meet with such kind of devices where the software gets involved. And how to address that, what need to be done with respect to those software. Yes, there is a approach, there is a way, and there are guidelines, and as well as what need to be done to meet such regulatory. There are information as well as the regulatory way of applicable things to be met. We can give information, and then we can get into such discussions later. But this is the way of approach for any type of software in a medical device. Am I clear?
Sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yes, Manaswita. Yes.
So I don't think that there is any other question that is left unanswered. So I would like to thank the speakers for today's webinar. And with the rising opportunity in India comes increased number of regulations that a company must face and overcome. And with your help and with your knowledge, I think a lot of queries will be worked out for them. So thank you, Meena ma'am, thank you KP sir for this great webinar. And
Yeah.
I want to thank all the participants too for attending this webinar and making it a success.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so much.
everyone.
Thank you.